Again.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Bornstein with Deltek, and thanks everyone for joining us. It is 1 o'clock on the East Coast, so we're looking at everybody. We still have a steady clip of people dialing in, so we are going to hold off for about 2-3 minutes while we let others join, and then we will get started. So please hold tight. We'll be back momentarily. All right, this is John again. It looks like we have a critical mass today, so let's get started. So again, thanks everyone for joining us for the Deltek and PSMJ Resources webinar. So to set the stage, I've been at Deltek 3 years, and this is one of the most popular webinars that I've had the privilege of organizing. And I think that the reason is that coming out of the Great Recession, the focus in the A&E industry has clearly focused back on project management. So to help firms, whether you are looking to improve your project management practices or build them, today we have a fantastic conversation. I'm going to introduce Bob and Dave in just a second, but just to set the stage, we're going to look at 3 things, the 3 things that we promised you. So the first is why, if you don't have a strong project management culture, it's something you want to think about immediately following this webinar. Now, with that in place, there are 3 pillars to project management excellence, and we are going to go into detail on all 3 of those. And then talking with Bob and Dave, we have about 45 minutes worth of content, at which point we're going to break and go to questions and answers. We're anticipating that there will be a lot of questions and answers, so they have agreed to stick around for an extra 15 minutes. So we'll have a half hour of Q&A. So with that said, it is my privilege to introduce today's speakers. You very well may know Dave Burstein and Bob, but I wanted to let's start with Dave to introduce himself.
Thank you, John. My name is Dave Burstein. I'm a principal at PSMJ Resources. Excuse me. And been with, just a little bit of background on myself. I'm a civil engineer, got my bachelor's and master's in civil engineering, and worked the first 26 years of my career with a company called Parsons Corporation. Actually, the first 10 years was with a company that got acquired by Parsons Corporation. Started as a junior engineer, ended up as president of a couple of their subsidiaries. So I really spent the first 26 years fighting the same battles that you guys fight every day, so I feel your pain. Been with PSMJ on a part-time basis since 1980. Full-time, been a principal with PSMJ since 1997. So been around the industry for quite a while, and hope to give you the benefit of some of the things that I learned from some people that are smarter than me.
Thanks, Dave. Bob Stalonis. I've been working with architects and engineers implementing financial software for over 35 years. And in the past 10 years, my role as a senior solution architect, I work with many of our customers to design and configure the vision software to really optimize their business processes, to improve efficiency, to increase visibility to some of the key performance indicators, and really to empower project managers to be more successful as managers.
Okay, so those are our experts, and between Bob, Dave, Deltek, and PSMJ, there's a collective 70-plus years of project management experience on the phone today. So very excited about that. So to just logistically, when we get to the Q&A portion of today's webinar, like we do on most Deltek webinars, feel free to use the Q&A tab and go to webinar. So with that said, let's get started with topic number 1, which is why a strong project management culture is absolutely essential. So Dave, you want to kick us off, please?
Sure will, John. This is one of my favorite little graphics here. It's kind of interesting if you look at it. This machine is very good at creating money out of apparently nothing. There's all kinds of money going into the machine, but coming out of the machine, the pile doesn't seem to be getting any higher. And to me, this is really a good analogy to what happens in a lot of firms that don't have a strong project management culture. Is they're very good about selling the work and bringing the work in the door, but they're not so good about turning that work into profits. And the only way that a firm can make money is on projects. If you're not making money on projects, you're not making money. John, you want to go to the next slide? Mine kind of stuck here. Is yours working?
Yep. We are there, Dave.
Okay, good deal. So if you go back and you look at the Project Management Institute, they identify 4 key project management roles. Project managers of any kind of project managers, regardless of what industry they're in, they need to plan the project, they need to organize the team to do the project, they need to direct that team, and they need to control the budget and the schedule and the quality. Those are project management roles that are ubiquitous across the board. In our industry, though, there's some additional roles that are very, very important. The first one is a sales role. It's the norm in our industry. In fact, PSMJ statistics show that every year between 75 and 80% of revenues from A&E firms come from existing clients. Those revenues don't come primarily as a result of sales expertise. They come as a result of the project managers really doing a great job to keep their clients happy and to keep their ear to the ground for more work. Upselling is what we call selling more of the same kind of work that they've been selling. Cross-selling is selling different kinds of work that maybe a different part of the company can do, and they're both really important. Project managers also have a sales role in closing new deals. We find that clients, once they make a short list, the number 1 criteria they use for picking the firm that's going to be selected is their confidence in the project manager. The third is that in most firms, project managers are one of, if not the lead, in the design and the technical direction of the project. So they have that role. The next role is financial. They don't have to earn just a profit. Excuse me. They have to earn the entire profit that was sold when that was built into the job when it was sold. And then finally, they have to make sure that the client gets billed accurately and the payment comes when it's supposed to come. So those are all roles that project managers have, in addition to the 4 typical PM roles. So where do they find time to do all that? We've developed what we call the 10% rule, and that is to say if you take all the hours that are allocated and budgeted for project, about 10% of those hours ought to be dedicated specifically to project management. All those things in the typical and additional PM roles here.
Okay, and Dave, if profit weren't enough reason to have a strong project management culture, I think this slide brings it home pretty clearly.
Yeah, you know, in the past, everybody was all, worried about profits, and they still are. But recently, in the last few years, another thing is coming to the fore, and that is a lot of firms have a large number of senior principals that are baby boomers, and they're retiring, or they're thinking about retiring, and they're looking around and saying, well, who's going to take my position? Who's going to buy my stock? How am I going to transition leadership and ownership? And the only real pool that principals come from is the project management pool. If the firm is not developing a certain percentage of its technical design staff into strong project managers, there is no pool from which to draw new principals. And so while every technical and design person isn't cut out to be project manager, a certain percentage of them need to be in order to create that pool to develop new principals and eventually new senior leadership in terms of CEO and COO.
We've got a good mix in the audience today, Dave, of senior management and project managers. So I think the question I think senior management would ask is, have you seen examples of lower valuations because that depth, the bench of talent hasn't existed at firms that PSMJ has looked at?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, you probably know, John, PSMJ does a lot of firm valuations every year. We do about 70 or 80 a year on average. And one of the main factors that we consider is the average age of the principals, when are they going to retire, and if they have a strong transition place, and if they have a strong project management culture in place. And if they don't, we downgrade their valuation and figure that the firm is worth less, both in terms of internal valuation and external valuation if they plan to sell to an outside buyer.
All right, that's pretty significant. Thanks, Dave. So again, everyone, you'll be able to ask questions about what you just heard from Dave, but let's bring it over to Bob, and three other specific ways where you see the impact, Bob.
Well, the graphic that Dave showed early there with the money coming in but the bottom line not expanding, I'm going to speak to some of the reasons for that. So certainly pretty compelling about ownership transition as one key element, but let's look at some other reasons where we see erosion in terms of the financial performance. So one is claims. Our research indicates that between 2 and 4% of revenue could be going out the door basically on one significant claim. So, and often that's a manifestation of missed expectations. So, or poor communication, maybe the deliverables really weren't the quality that they needed to be. So I think that for many architects and engineers, your client is holding you out as an expert. And there's an expectation that you will guide them through a process, that you will lead that. And if that doesn't happen, then in a significant case, we're talking about a legal claim. And not just the dollar element that I spoke about, there's also impact on staff availability. If someone is basically defending a claim, they're not going to be available to provide service to other clients. You also have your reputation to be concerned about. Many AE firms have very high repeat business level, and if you're basically the word on the street is that you're having trouble with the work you're doing, that's going to have an adverse effect there. And also just staff morale. It could definitely draw that down as well. So there are both financial and non-financial elements around claims. And some of those things could be repeated when we look at client retention. As I mentioned, frequently, that's a high percentage for many of the companies. And our research indicates between 6 and 15 times, it's 6 to 15 times as expensive to win a new client as it is to maintain an existing client. So once again, with relatively tight margins, our clarity report indicated about a 10% margin. If you're needing to spend additional money to win work, that's only going to have a negative effect on that, or more pressure to win higher amounts of work just to cover those costs. And lastly, employee retention. As the economy has improved and there was a substantial exodus of talent through that tough time, many organizations with strong growth plans are concerned about, will we have the right talent? So if the environment that we have at our organization, we're not clear on our responsibilities, there's a sense of lack of empowerment or authority for some of the managers. If it's a very inconsistent process where if I'm a staff member and I work for 3 different project managers and the process is totally different, it's a kind of a confusing and hectic environment. That's all going to have a negative impact on your ability to keep your top talent and also be attractive to additional top talent that you'll need to grow your organization. So I think those are 3 significant impacts of not having a strong project management culture and ability to execute your work well.
Okay, so I think the case has been made, and I anticipate a lively Q&A discussion. So the case has been made, so let's flip it. Now, how do you do this? So the first part of the first pillar is building strong and effective project managers. So what we would like to do is just take an informal poll of everyone on the call today of what you think the characteristics of a great project manager are. So the way we like to do this is we're not going to put up a poll, but just in the Q&A tab, just type in what you think those characteristics are, and Bob is going to look at some of the tallies before we look into some of the research that PSMJ has done. So if you can, we'll wait a second while you guys put the questions in, or the answers rather. Let's see. All right, here you go, Bob.
Okay.
He's writing as fast as he can.
Okay, so some of the first ones in terms of skills or characteristics: flexible, leadership, communication,
Oh, let me scroll back up.
budget-minded, detail-oriented, honesty. So I think, building trust would be, and communication seems to be coming up probably also good people skills. So communication and good people skills seem to be the most frequently mentioned.
Okay, that is a, thank you everybody. That's a great grounding for what Dave is going to lead us through next.
And by the way, we're going to go ahead and tally those, and we will send an email to everybody here to see what the total results were. In fact, we're going to find it pretty interesting as well. Yeah, this slide here, this shows the response of a large public works agency in the Southwest. We did a project management training program for them a few years ago and asked them the same question. And the question is, what makes a great project manager for a consulting firm that they work with? And this public works agency works with lots of different consulting firms. And so I thought it would be interesting to compare the answers that you guys came up with, since you're all from the A&E industry, with the answers that a major client of A&E firms came up with to the exact same question. And the answers are not that different. I mean, if you listen to the things that Bob talked about, they're pretty much on here. But look for a minute at number 10. And by the way, these answers are in the order in which the responses were given. So that, in other words, the number 1 response was follows through on commitments and on their commitments and on others' commitments. Number 2 was good listener, and so on. Look at what's in 10th place. Technically proficient. That wasn't even one of the ones that Bob mentioned when he was reading off some of the comments that you guys were making and some of the traits that you identified of great project managers. And here it is in 10th place. It's on the list, but it's pretty far down the list. And yet, if you think about it, that's the reason that most design and technical people in A&E firms get promoted to project manager, is because they've demonstrated technical proficiency. So we have a serious mismatch in the way that in the reason that we promote people versus the traits that we really are looking for. And I think that's part of the reason that we don't always get the degree of satisfaction as principals we want to get in terms of how good our project managers are. And from a project manager's perspective, I think it's also one of the reasons that project managers get really frustrated, is because they end up being pushed into a role of project management that maybe they really weren't cut out for, and maybe they shouldn't even been in.
I think we could spend a whole conversation, and it'd be fun to talk about how the industry got to this situation. But we'll save that for another day, and we'll go to this slide, Dave.
Yeah, people ask us, well, what is a strong project manager? We use that term a lot, and this is one of the best ways to explain it that I've seen, and we've been using this explanation for years now, and it seems to hit home with people. I'd like everybody here to think about the last time that you went to a really nice fine dining restaurant where everything was just perfect. The server was great, the food was perfect just the way you wanted it, everything was just right. And I want you to think of that restaurant as if it were an A&E firm. And I want you to think of these two people, and this couple in this picture, as the clients of that A&E firm. And I want you to think of this guy with the tuxedo as the project manager for the A&E firm. And so I want to evaluate this guy's performance not as a server in the restaurant, but as a project manager in an A&E firm as if he were in your firm. So think about the last time you went to have that really great meal. Did your server explain all the scope options that his firm had to offer and was knowledgeable and able to answer any questions about scope options? Did he make sure that you understood his firm's pricing structure before you decided on the scope of services that you wanted? Spoiler alert, that's the right-hand side of the menu. Third, did he listen carefully, take appropriate notes, and communicate to the project team in the kitchen exactly the scope that every one of you wanted, so that when the scope of work was completed by the project team in the kitchen, it came out to your table and every one of you in your party got exactly the scope that you had anticipated you were going to get and wanted? Number 6, did he deliver that scope in a reasonable amount of time consistent with your expectations? Number 7, did he check with you from time to time to see if you wanted some additional scope items for additional fee? And by the way, a secret of the restaurant business is they don't make their money on the entrees, they make their money on the extras. The second glass of wine, the dessert, the appetizers, and so on. Number 8, did he make sure that an accurate invoice was delivered to you upon completion of the project? Number 9, did he make sure you paid the invoice before leaving the premises? And if he answered all those 9 questions, yes, that server's pretty good. And that's really our model for what a strong project manager is in an A&E firm. If your project managers can do all those things, they're strong project managers. I'll give you a little bit more detail in a little bit. I wanted to talk about number 10. And I want to talk about the difference between how project managers are incentivized in fine dining restaurants versus how project managers are incentivized in A&E firms. In typical fine dining restaurants, if you take the average annual income of project managers, servers there, they typically are pretty much average around $100,000 a year. And of that, about 25% comes from salary paid by the restaurant, and the other 75% comes from in the form of incentive compensation paid by the customers in the form of tips. So they are highly incentivized to provide great service. In our industry, it's a little different. According to PSMJ data, fully 96% of the average project manager's compensation comes in the form of base pay, and only 4% comes in the form of compensation bonuses that are in any way related to performance. So maybe we need to take a page out of the restaurant industry and start compensating our project managers a little bit differently. That's also the subject for a different webinar, so let's move on to the next one, John.
Okay, and for the next what we've asked Bob to do is, in your 35 years of experience, sum up what you have seen in one slide.
Yeah, right. Well, the first bullet, I think, is really a critical one, which is the visions created by senior management. I always see senior management on top of or in front of a significant change in the organization. So that's a cornerstone. So there's a level of commitment, and part of it is they understand the strategic importance of strong project management. So we talked earlier about ownership transition, your ability to consistently meet client expectation, your ability to bring good numbers to the bottom line so you can continue to invest and grow the company. Those are all elements. And then we talked even about making sure you can maintain your best staff and attract new ones. Those are all some of the strategic elements that senior management that's progressive is going to be aware of. And they'll also authorize the resources, because I know there's sensitivity to utilization. So what do you mean that's non-billable time? Well, the leaders in the more progressive firms understand that it's time well spent to be able to develop the business skills and the ability of their project managers to be effective in their role, both in terms of managing their team, managing the client relationship, making sure that the projects are on schedule and on budget. And another thing is that senior management can adopt the process. They help to institutionalize it by fundamentally saying, we're going to utilize this process, we're going to use this information, we're going to rely on it to run our business. And by virtue of that, that really makes everyone else comply and become more skilled at it. So senior management is really critical to this. And then clear company-wide standards. So, you know, the better run companies, the way you structure your plans to do the work that clarifies your scope and your schedule, it really provides an environment that's clear on your obligations. I talked earlier about the idea of potentially having problems with client satisfaction or having problems even to the extent of, you know, claims. Well, part of that is that we weren't clear in terms of what we were going to deliver and when we were going to deliver it. The better run firms do that. In efficient processes, they eliminate duplicate entries. They don't have multiple systems. There's one version of the truth. And better firms utilize technology to really leverage that so that they have the visibility, particularly in the mobile environment that we're living in today, that decision makers have the information they need to make good decisions. The other thing is you know, formal project management training. As mentioned, technical knowledge is almost a given with the education that most project managers receive. But when we get to project management training, it's much more of a hit and miss, and the better run firms make that commitment to ensure that they have that. Certainly PSMJ is renowned for their ability to train project managers with their very popular boot camp is just one example of that. And I think mentoring staff to really build skills, the softer skills like you know, public speaking and team building and things like that, that again, they generally would not have as just a given, but help to develop that. And lastly, accountability. Companies that at the end of at least every month are looking at progress against the deliverables. Where are we in terms of our schedule? Where are we in terms of our plan? And what types of corrective action can we take if we're falling behind? So those are really the elements that I observe in the better run companies.
Okay, so we thanks, Bob. We have one last takeaway for you in this first pillar.
Yeah, so the question now is, well, how do you develop your project managers to become strong project managers like that waiter in the picture? And this is a great approach to doing it, and that is as part of your annual performance review. When the principals sit down with the project managers, the first thing they should do is to take an inventory of which PM duties and authority the project managers are currently undertaking and which ones they want them to undertake. So let's just, and this is our list of what we consider to be the duties and authority for strong project managers. Let's just take the first one. So let's say that a principal and his or her project manager that reports to him or her sits down, performance review, and the first one that comes up is managing proposals for the projects that he or she will ultimately manage, and currently that project manager has not been doing that. But the principal wants him to do it, and so the vision is yes. And so then the discussion is, all right, well, now how are we going to get from no to yes, and what's a reasonable time period? And let's just say that that's a goal for 1 year. So how are we going to get from no to yes in a year? And there's a whole plan. Maybe the plan starts with the project manager reviewing previous proposals. The next step would be preparing portions of simple proposals. Maybe the next step, portions of complex proposals. Maybe the next step would be prepare full drafts of simple proposals, and so on, until the project manager is completely capable of doing proposals on his or her own. And you can go down this list and have a similar discussion about each one of these duties and levels of authority that we feel really define what a strong project manager is.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So that's pillar one. So pillar two is this is not just about building the most effective project managers, but this has to go across the organization. So Bob, what have you seen in terms of best practices?
Best practices fundamentally support the project manager in being successful. So some of the things that I observe, templates and tools to comply with standards. So companies that have a good comprehensive planning program fundamentally develop standard templates that articulate the scope based on the types of work that they do, so that a PM has a wonderful starting point that they can then modify as appropriate based on the unique requirements. But they're 80% there simply because they have a good guideline, and it also helps identify all the steps necessary. So, when we speak about scope, there shouldn't be a lot of items overlooked because it's a comprehensive guide. So templates are a good example of that, and other processes that help streamline and guide. I think those are the two key elements, streamline and guide. So again, they're efficient, they're well-documented processes. This is good from two perspectives. One, the existing staff who are project managers are going to be more efficient, and it's going to be a clearer path. But when we bring new people along, it's extremely important that we have an environment where they can learn quickly and they have some good, strong guidance. We can also help in terms of the software, which basically can be proactive in helping guide with exception analysis. You don't want a project manager to have to leaf through 200 pages of printout to try and glean some insight. So through workflows, we can alert them when things like their estimate at completion is going to exceed the contract value and alert that. Or often in the design process, there are major milestones. When those are reached, to alert the project manager, or some of the financial elements like accounts receivable are over 60 days old. So we can be proactive in identifying some of the critical elements that a PM should be watching without them having to do a lot of investigation, if you will. And then I think insight into project financial performance, it's back to kind of the blocking and tackling of the fundamentals, understanding what the key performance indicators are. Some companies manage by multipliers. Others look, if they're managing at billing rates, maybe a variance to the budget. There are a number of metrics that will give you essentially the same type of information, but the better companies establish standards within their whole company, and that's the communication, that's the terminology that's used throughout so that there's clarity on that. And again, senior management, once again, playing a key role in bringing people along. Again, softer skills like negotiation, conflict resolution, and being effective at doing presentations. The better run firms commit senior management to bring people along so that they can be more effective.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue because, Dave, I know you're going to take us on a deeper dive on that partnering relationship.
Yeah, this is an example from a firm that we worked with, and it's one of the best and simplest ways that I've seen that this firm has defined the relationship between the project managers and the principals that they report to. A variety of activities, everything from developing fee proposals, handling fee negotiations, selecting the team, and so on down the activity list. And they've identified what part of those activities is responsible by the project manager and which part is responsible by the principal. So, for example, in fee proposals at this firm, they want the project managers who are going to manage the project if they win it, to prepare the fee proposals for two reasons. One is that the project manager should be the person who understands the scope the best, and second is they want the project manager to be fully committed to whatever fee ends up getting into the project. So the project managers prepare the fee proposals, but they get reviewed and approved by an appropriate principal. So there's checks and balances. And if you go through this list, everything down to fee negotiations, all the way down to accountability, you'll see a really clearly defined relationship between the project manager and the principal where the two work hand in glove toward a common goal of a successful project. And I'm sure yours can probably be a little bit different than this, but in general, you should strive to have some sort of relationship that you can display as simply as this one is so that there's no ambiguity at all. There's another thing that at PSMJ we feel really strongly about, and I personally feel really strongly about in terms of tools for project management. There's a lot of tools that project managers need, everything from job cost accounting system to CRM to a lot of things. But I think the one that's really the most critical is earned value management. And we could spend an entire hour on earned value management, in fact, way more than that. So I'm not going to get into it in detail, but just in brief, earned value management consists of looking at three different curves. The blue line is the planned expenditures. That's how fast you plan to spend the money, which is shown on the left y-axis. And on the right y-axis, how fast you plan to make progress on the job. And that's done at the beginning of the project, and it doesn't change unless there's a contract modification. The red comes from the accounting system. That's how much money you've actually spent all along the way. And the green line comes from the project manager's independent estimate and the project team's independent estimate of how much work has actually been accomplished on each task and rolled up to how much work has been accomplished on the overall project. And you compare the three lines, and it tells you the status of the project. In this particular project, you can see that the green line is under the blue line, which means less progress has been made than planned, so that the project is behind schedule. And you can see that the green line is under the red line, which means less progress has been made than money spent. So in this case, it's over budget. And if you don't have an early warning system like this, you can get lulled into a sense of false security that just because your actual expenditures, the red line, are less than your planned expenditures, the blue line, everything seems to be okay when it's really not.
Okay. Thanks, Dave. So we're on to pillar 3, and accountability is one that I'm most passionate about, because we could talk until we're blue in the face about best practices, but this is where the rubber meets the road. So, Bob, what have you seen in your 35 years?
Okay. Once again, senior management plays a key role. They set the standards that need to be followed. And the one hallmark, in my view, of a well-run AE firm is that there's a rigorous project review, at least monthly. And there are too many organizations that I work with where the month-end process is simply getting a bill out the door. And invoicing is important. Cash flow is certainly important. But the better-run firms realize evaluating where you are on your deliverables, like the three-line graph that Dave showed, is really essential to knowing where you are and also give you an opportunity to take corrective action before the project is really out of hand. So the better-run companies, senior management is very involved. There's a discipline and a rigor around the month-end process. As far as the project managers go, you know, that their processes are well documented, that they can have a good trail, that they can document the communication that they've had with the client, with their team, that that's all laid out well, that the plans are current, they're up to date, they're a real indicator of where the project is, and by extension, if you're down at the resource level, it can also give you excellent insight into your resource requirements company-wide, in that people know how to escalate. So if there is a problem, the PM is not on their own, that it's a team effort, the principals can get involved, others can get involved to help mitigate the situation and hopefully turn it around both from a client satisfaction standpoint and from a financial standpoint. And that they are monitoring their key performance indicators, whatever the ones that are focused on by organization, they drive that, they identify whether you're in good shape or not, and that those benchmarks are closely monitored. And I also see the role of accounting and finance. The progressive companies, the individuals in those parts of the company realize the stronger they are in empowering a project manager to be effective in their management role, that can have the most profound impact on the bottom line that they can provide. So those are the elements that I see in terms of, from the compliance standpoint, better run firms do.
Okay. And Dave, let's bring it over to you.
Yeah, I'm often asked how you measure the effectiveness of project managers in an organization. And this is really the best way I know. And yeah, John, go back and do these one at a time here.
There we go.
Yeah, leave it at that one. Okay. What this is, this was developed by an architectural firm in North Carolina and reproduced courtesy of a partner of both of ours, actually, Client Feedback Tool. And they measure profitability and client evaluations equally, because those are really the two most important criteria for success of a project manager. Are they making their profits, and are they satisfying the clients? So in this example here, you have a project manager. Most of their projects are above the target profit, and most of their clients are very happy. This is a project manager that needs to be on the pathway to becoming a principal in the firm. Moving on to the second example, you can see here is a project manager whose clients are very happy but doesn't make any money. Obviously, this project manager needs some work on financial management, and if that still doesn't work, then you have to start wondering whether this person is really cut out to be a project manager. But what we find is you can often convert these number 2 circles into number 1 circles with good training and effective mentoring. Let's look at project manager number 3 here. Clients aren't very happy and not making any money. This is a person who is miscast. This person should never have been a project manager, and the sooner they get out of that, the better for everybody. And then if you look at project manager number 4, here's a project manager that's making plenty of money, but the clients aren't very happy. Well, this is not a long-term sustainable solution. There needs to be an intervention here. And one way or the other, this project manager needs to learn how to make his or her clients happy, or they're not going to continue to give them work.
Okay.
So here's a list of the things that we have found, or at least some of the things that we have found that principals really need to know about their project managers' projects. And I think for all of you who are on the line who are principals, this is a good little test for you. When you get a copy of these slides, you can go through these 10 and ask yourself, do you know the answer to all 10 of these questions? Because if you don't, you're not doing the degree of oversight that you should be doing. If you're a project manager, you need to be sure that you inform your principal on a regular basis so that they understand all 10 of these things, that they're properly involved in the project. Not micromanaging, but properly involved in overseeing it. This is one way that some firms seem to use in terms of how principals and CFOs get information to answer those questions from the project manager. And they may not be doing it intentionally, but this is how the project manager feels. And Bob mentioned about ongoing monthly project review process, which we're absolutely in agreement on. Best practice of top firms is to do those on a regular basis. But if those reviews end up making the project manager feel like this, they're not going to work. Because if a project manager feels as if he or she is going to be beaten up for bringing bad news, they simply won't bring bad news. And then it just becomes a game of gotcha and defeats the whole purpose. So let's look at some better ways to get the answers. One of those is you can have just management. Go back to the first one there for a second, John. One of those is just what they call MBWA, management by wandering around. Take that list of 10 questions, if you're a principal, and go to just walk around to each project manager's office, go into their office and ask them the questions about their projects and get the answers that way. Very informal, but it can be very effective. Or you can do it with more formal project reviews. And the question, if you do more formal reviews, then how do you select projects for those? And here are some guidelines, if you're a principal, for some things that you can use to select which projects should be reviewed, because you probably don't have time to review every project every month. But these are some of the things that are going to be indicators in terms of which projects to review. For example, the second bullet, if the percent earned on your earned value management equals exactly the percent spent month after month, probably something wrong. You want to find out about it. And sometimes it's just down to the last bullet. You just haven't done a review of that project manager in a while, and it's time to do one. Everybody who's interested in doing formal reviews, as opposed to just the wandering around, needs a process. And what we've done here is, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I wanted to provide this to you as an example of an effective process that one multi-office firm has been using to do ongoing, regular project reviews of all their project managers' projects. And I'm not suggesting that this particular approach is necessarily right for you, but it's a good example of an approach that makes sure that these things happen on an ongoing basis. And that is really the heart of having a PM culture, is where things happen regularly. They just happen on a regular, ongoing basis without anybody doing anything exceptional.
Okay, so taking stock of time, we're 45 minutes in, So, and that's exactly what we promised. So we see the questions coming in, so please continue to do that because we're almost there. So I think this is an opportunity for Dave and Bob to condense 70 years of experience and 45 minutes worth of content into some very clear takeaways for everybody on the phone today.
All right, so here's my four. First of all, make sure that you have, if you're a principal, make sure you have a specific list of all the duties that you expect your project managers to undertake for all the project managers in your firm. If you're a project manager, sit down with your principal supervisor and make sure that you understand what they expect of you in terms of duties and responsibilities. Second, make sure that the project manager's performance is evaluated in terms of those two key parameters. Are they making the profits that were expected, and are they satisfying the clients to the degree that are expected, or preferably better in both cases? Number three, make sure that you have a written plan, an actual development plan to take promising design technical professionals and design professionals and those that have the promise to become project managers. Make sure you have a plan to turn them into strong project managers. And make sure that you communicate regularly with your project managers to find out the status of all the key issues in their projects. And if you're a project manager, make sure you're communicating it to your principals.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Bob, what are your four?
Well, once again, senior management being the lead, really setting the goals and really staying with it, adopting the processes. So really institutionalizing the process. Senior management can do that. That you make project planning an integral part of the process so that you've identified your scope and your schedule, people are aware of it, and they can fundamentally work to that, and it's a great communication device both internally with subs and with the client. Back to the staff, making sure that we're on track, so clear career path, having the right support systems in terms of training and development, and basically having mentoring that brings people along that's going to have a beneficial effect both on turnover and on your ability to attract new talent. And better firms, they leverage technology. They want to make their processes as efficient as possible so it's not any more of a burden, and that they centralize the information so they have an enterprise-wide view of their organization. Those are the key takeaways that I would leave you with.
Okay, so that's the content. So before we go over to the Q&A section, Deltek and PSMJ wanted to offer some follow-up if you're interested. So here's Deltek's. So for all the Deltek clients on the phone today, at Kathy Bagford's suggestion, we are going to have a follow-up webinar on March 11th. That is a reprise of a session that Don Jayeski led at Insight. So 11 o'clock at 1, or sorry, March 11th at 1 o'clock. The registration link is here. How do you apply some of the best practices you just heard from Bob and Dave using your existing vision tools? So please register for that. And then we also have developed a new project management ebook. So again, showing how clients are using vision to be successful with many of the things that we talked about today. So Dave, I won't speak for you. Do you want to describe some of the resources that PSMJ has?
Yeah, I thought that there's a couple of them in particular that we thought would be useful. One is the Project Management Bootcamp, which I think Bob mentioned earlier. We train thousands of project managers every year in this industry. In fact, more than everybody else combined. We do a lot of project management training, and there's a special offer here that if you're interested in that, call Diane Constantine at the number below, and she'll make a special offer on that. We also have a monthly project management newsletter that people have found really helpful in having their project managers get great ideas on a regular, ongoing, monthly basis. They're always thinking about project management. And again, there's an offer here that if you want to take advantage of that, just give Diane a call within a couple of weeks of today, within 2 weeks of today, and she'll fix you up with that as well.
Okay. So for everybody on the phone, you don't have to furiously write all this down. We're going to send you the slides and today's recording in an email that you'll get from Bob tomorrow. So before we move over to the Q&A, I just want to make sure that everybody sees this slide. So if you have any questions whatsoever, call Bob, call Dave. So with this said, here in Boston, we are going to open up the Q&A tab. So we have about 25 minutes to go through questions. So let's see if I can figure out how to enlarge the Q&A tab. And we'll get started.
10 to 90%.
Yeah, so Dave, this one is for you. So the question is, please clarify, if PMs do those roles for 10% of their time, what are they doing the other 90%, i.e. what is the real work?
Well, it's not 10% of their time. What we're suggesting is that 10% of a project budget should be allocated to project management. So if, for example, a project manager does nothing but project management, that's 100% of their time, but it should only be 10% of the project. So it's a little different. In fact, our statistics show that on average, project managers spend about 25 to 35% of their time doing project management. The rest of the time they spend mostly doing technical or design work, also doing business development, writing proposals, making presentations, and a little bit of administrative work.
Okay. Dave, next one's for you from Andrew Hill. How does PSMJ evaluate the strength of the project manager culture? What are the metrics you use and specific things you look at?
Well, one of the first things we look at is we look at to see what kind of project control system the firm has and how well it's implemented, and particularly if they really are doing earned value management. That's a critical issue for us. If they're not doing earned value management and they don't have a control system that they use regularly on an ongoing basis, that tells us that there is no strong project management culture. The second thing we look at is there a systematic way of getting the information about project status from the project managers to the cognizant principals on a regular basis so that the project principals have an opportunity to help the project managers if they get stuck or if they run into some rough spots. Those kinds of things always happen. So those are really the two things that we look for most. And I must say, most firms fall down on at least one of those.
Okay. Well, we are scrolling through the Q&A log because thankfully most of you replied on the characteristics of a great PM. So we're going to have to scroll faster. Okay. Let's see. Get to the questions. All right. How about this as a ballpark question from Lauren for both of you? It would be interesting for me to learn what firms do or don't do that are obstacles preventing good project managers from being successful. So let's go on your experience. Tell us some good stories.
Okay. There are a couple of things. One, I alluded to it briefly, but the idea that utilization is very important, but that utilization overrides investment in staff development. So I think that's one of the obstacles. I think another obstacle is if a firm is growing, often the amount of time that it would take to really develop a PM gets shortchanged due to the fact that you're really busy and you're trying to get things done. So often a person has a PM title without really the opportunity to develop the skills or the infrastructure around that for them to be successful. And the outcomes generally are not good, both in terms of the financial result for the company, the result for the client, and the result for the individual who's quote-unquote been promoted. So I think that that's a common area of a problem that I observe frequently. Just not enough time committed to bring people along. And I think one of the diagrams that was shown that David had, that some people that might be strong technically would not necessarily have a lot of the other skills, and it's a broad-based role, and they get put into a position where they're really not a good match for the role. So those are the things that I see as potential problems or challenges.
Yeah, I certainly agree with exactly everything Bob said there, and I'll just throw in one of the things that we found that can be helpful in in dealing with some of those challenges is a role that we call assistant project manager. Assistant project manager role is someone who's already on the team, a technical or design person, probably a task manager, who also gets a title of assistant project manager to help the project manager do all these things. And we find that when project managers use the assistant project manager concept properly, not only does it help them because it gives them somebody else that has some time to do some of these project management activities, which oftentimes they're so pressed that they don't, but also it helps develop project managers a lot faster, because pretty soon, once somebody's been an assistant project manager a couple of times, they're ready to be a full-fledged PM.
Okay, so Dave, here's a good follow-on question to that. How can you tell someone on your, in full English, how can you tell when somebody is ready to take on a PM role?
Well, I think that it really does lend itself very well to the whole concept of assistant PM. Firms that use the assistant PM concept on a regular basis, that's how they do it. And they do it very effectively, is before someone is thrown into the deep end of the pool to manage a project, they're thrown into the shallow end of the pool to see if they can be an effective assistant project manager. And if they can, then there's very little risk in making them a project manager. But making someone a project manager directly from a technical or design background, that's a very risky proposition to do otherwise.
Okay. So here's a somewhat different but related question. So with all due respect to principals, do you guys see the same dichotomy why principals get promoted to their positions? They're technically proficient but don't have the soft skills, everything that we talked about today?
I definitely have observed that in certain organizations that I've worked with. And I think the scenario is you need to look at supplementing. If that's the case and there's a relatively high percentage of the principals that may not have the real strong business acumen and the ability to necessarily mentor and train in that area, then I think you really have to look at supplementing it. What some organizations have done, again, strong accounting groups that are open, and I think the term open to a real service orientation towards bringing project managers along in terms of contract management, budgeting, and so forth, or identifying a few strong project managers with years of experience who have already led, if you will, and already have high credibility in the organization. They could be used to buttress or supplement the fact that some of the principals may not have the depth of management experience. So that's what I've seen some organizations do to try and address that issue.
Yeah, and I think another part of it is something Bob talked about before, and that is that most firms have such an extreme emphasis, in fact I call it an obsession, on utilization and keeping high utilization, that it really precludes the kind of training and development that people need to become effective principals. For example, in virtually every industry in America, part of the career development program for people that are going to become senior leaders is to take temporary positions in different parts of the company. Well, we almost never see that in A&E firms because utilization precludes that. And that's just one of many examples. I think people have to get over this obsession with utilization and look a little bit beyond that if they're really going to develop the next generation of leaders.
Okay, I think this is a tactical question, but I think it falls squarely in the remit of one of the things that a PM does. So the question is, what's the best way to make clients understand your firm's pricing and cost of service?
Well, I would go back to the fact that the more definitive you can be with your plans and your ability to articulate both the steps you're taking and the value that those steps are providing. So I think that it's critical that it's a value-based discussion, but it also has the rigor and the detail of literally what you're going to cover. That's your best way to basically get the client. And again, the assumption is you're the expert, so it is an education process, but I think that that's a key element in being more successful with that. And again, articulating as much as possible from a value-based approach, and the value, again, within the purview of the client, what they're going to derive as a benefit from the service you're providing. I think those are elements that I would recommend as you address that.
Yeah, and I think there's really, in order to answer that question properly, you really have to look at two very different types of clients. One is government agencies like state departments of transportation, like the federal government, where pricing is all about, your negotiated FAR overhead rate and negotiated profit and number of hours and all that kind of stuff. Built that way, and the other is private sector clients and some government sector clients where it's more about value. And so you really have to start out knowing what's your client's philosophy and process for negotiating fees before you can really answer that question properly.
Okay. I think this next question is essentially, so the question is, how do firms perform who don't use or ignore accountability?
Well,
who don't use or okay. Go ahead, Bob.
I think when you saw those charts of the 4 different personality styles or performance styles of the project managers, what happens is that those individuals are all treated the same way in an organization like that. And I think one of the major risks, again, is being able to keep your better people, because the number one person was good at meeting client needs and making money. And I suspect that someone who has that skill set would be frustrated in an organization where you have people that aren't doing any of those things well and are equally rewarded, have equal status, and so forth. So I just don't see, I don't see organizations like that positioning themselves both to be successful today or in the future.
Yeah, we see, I think the whole issue of accountability is a huge one in our industry. I think people who are principals in A&E firms really aren't very good at establishing accountability, and a lot of them don't even know what it means. And so we have a lot of mediocre firms where there isn't a lot of accountability, and they just sort of go with the economy. If the economy is doing well and there's tons of work, then they do okay. If the economy is not so good and there isn't enough work, then they do lousy. And they just kind of bob up and down with the tide. And we see a lot of firms like that, but the real top-performing firms are not like that. They have accountability. One of the things we started doing around 7 or 8 years ago is identifying the top-performing firms on 12 different metrics, a whole balanced scorecard, not just growth and profitability. We call it our Circle of Excellence. We publish that every year. And when we interview those people and talk to them about how they accomplish it, one of the things that jumps out loud and clear is the Circle of Excellence firms really have accountability, whereas the typical run-of-the-mill firm typically doesn't have much.
Okay, so here's a really good question. I mean, one commonality in some of the questions I'm seeing is, the distinction between a large and a small firm. So here's the question: what suggestions do you have for a very small firm, where often technical skills are very specific to that one person, and that one person also has many other hats, project management, leader, etc.?
Well, in large, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'll take this one first, then you can follow up too.
Sure.
I guess in small firms, generally small firms handle smaller projects. Now that's not always the case. There are some exceptions, but most small firms handle relatively small projects. In that case, you really don't need project managers with a whole lot of sophisticated techniques in managing their projects. What you need is project managers who are smart and project managers who are really dedicated to the success of the project, both financially and from a client satisfaction standpoint. So if you have a small firm doing small projects, that's really what you're looking for, is you're looking for smarts and for dedication. Occasionally you'll have a small firm that does big projects, and that's a whole much more complicated affair. And in that case, you really have to train those project managers into more sophisticated project management techniques, things like earned value management and the rest.
All right.
I was just going to add one thought. I think in the smaller organizations, it's to some extent even more compelling to develop at least some fundamental project management skills. I agree with Dave that the complexity isn't there, but sometimes smaller organizations put themselves into a tough position relative to ownership transition because there's one rainmaker, and they don't really have any infrastructure below that to be able to move the firm along through a transition. So part of it is, I think, even in the smaller organizations, paying some attention to bringing along the potential talent to be effective at that helps you both in the short term, but I think particularly in the long term, if you look at ownership transition and things of that nature.
Okay. Dave, question. You were asked to provide some further explanation on the earned value graph that you presented earlier.
Yeah. Where can you get more information? Is that the question?
No, just more details around what you're showing on that slide and the concept of earned value.
Oh boy.
Okay, so now we said not
we
2
don't
hours.
have enough time, but I tell you what I'll be glad to do is if anybody shoots me an email, I will be delighted to send you a white paper on earned value management that describes it a whole lot better than I have time to right here.
Great. That sounds good.
Yeah, I think that's a good answer.
All right, I'll take this one. So, Mary, you had asked if the client feedback tool referenced in evaluating PMs is part of Deltek software. So the answer is no. Client Feedback Tool is a company in Raleigh, North Carolina. So all they do is help solicit input from clients on how your firm is performing. And that outside-in perspective is huge. So they have a product. It does integrate with Deltek Vision, so there's a partnership between the organizations. And in fact, Deltek, PSMJ, and Client Feedback Tool are in the early stages of planning a webinar for this spring where we'll talk more about the concept of incorporating client feedback into the overall PM experience.
Yeah, and in the meantime, if anybody is interested, PSMJ and Client Feedback Tool also have a relationship where we're able to get for PSMJ clients independent, confidential client feedback from actual clients for as little as $15 per client. So in other words, you get 100, you can get up to 100 clients providing feedback for only $1,500, which is like the deal of the century. If anybody's interested in more about that, again, just shoot me an email, and I'd be glad to provide you with more information.
Okay, so Bob and I are looking through the questions. Let's see. We talked about small, medium-sized firms. How about this? Is becoming a principal a natural progression from being a project manager? And if so, are there any areas, responsibilities to focus on?
Well, I mean, Dave kind of laid out a number of the skills that a project manager needs to develop. What I've observed in medium and larger companies, just like the graphs indicated, not everybody is necessarily cut out to be a project manager, so many of them have multiple career paths, meaning you want to maintain very strong technical talent even if they really are not on a career path to be principal. So that's one thing, is you probably don't want to shut out or disenfranchise very, very talented people just because they're not on that path. So that's one of the things I observed. But back to the project manager becoming a principal, I think it's the areas that typically are a little more challenging, which is, ability to be effective at winning work, ability to manage that work and manage the client relationship. Fundamentally, again, the high client satisfaction and the high profitability, the individuals that can do that, they're the ones that you want, frankly, leading the organization.
Yeah, and part of the problem with answering that question is there's not a uniform definition of the word principal. What's a principal in one firm may be something different than a principal in another firm. So it's kind of hard to answer that. But in general, if we substitute the word senior management for principal, what we find is some project managers can be great project managers. Happy clients just love them. They make money on the projects. Great project managers, but not necessarily great senior leaders in the firm. And once to become a senior leader in the firm, it takes additional things. You have to be able to go out and develop new business with new clients, not just milk the existing clients that you have, which is what project managers mostly do in the business development role. You have to be able to really develop people, which again is not necessarily the function of a project manager. You have to be able to hire new people. You have to do a lot of things that project managers don't need to do. And so just like not every good technical person is cut out to be a project manager, not every good project manager is cut out to be a senior leader in the firm. So I think you have to be realistic about what kinds of skills are needed as project manager, and then what kinds of skills are needed as senior leader.
Okay. About 5 minutes left, so we'll keep going. I think, Dave, this is a good one for you. What's the best way to gather client satisfaction from our clients at a quantitative level instead of just qualitative?
Well, I gave you the pitch for client feedback tool, which are great. I love client feedback tool. They get great feedback, and they benchmark the feedback. I mean, that's a great way to do it. It's super cheap, $15 per client. I personally really like that, but that's not the only way. I mean, you can send out your own client feedback forms. You can visit clients and come back and fill out the form. The person who did the visit can come back and fill out the form. The one thing that it should be, though, is it needs to be from someone other than the project manager. Don't ask your project managers to go out and get the feedback. Make sure that comes from the marketing. Most firms do it as part of the marketing department's responsibility. Some firms do it as part of their firm's quality program, but make sure that it comes from someone other than the PM.
Okay. And for Deltek clients, I think one of the things that I can suggest is the LinkedIn group. So if you want to understand how other Deltek clients are being successful with client feedback, go into the LinkedIn groups because the community is there to help. I like this question. Is any direction available on how to scale great project management practices to small-scale projects, i.e. projects with small budgets, small time frame?
It's a great question, and PSMJ actually has a tool that we've developed that does a very simplified version of earned value management specifically for small projects, and we give it away for free. So if anyone would like that, it's called PlanTrax Lite, P-L-A-N-T-R-A-X, Lite, L-I-T-E. Just shoot me an email, tell me you'd like a complimentary copy of PlanTrax Lite, and we'd be glad to give it to you.
Okay. All right, so let's say it's 2:13, so we'll do 3 more questions. So this is a loaded one. Can you share any methods for instilling buy-in to upper management on effective project management culture?
I would look at some of the items that we talked about, both in terms of staff retention, some of the places like that, a benefit to the bottom line of reducing potential claims, higher client satisfaction. I try and talk through some of the strategic benefits of that, and those would be some of the elements that I would bring to bear if I were trying to influence senior management.
Yeah, I find that probably the biggest barrier is senior management doesn't really understand what a strong project management culture really is, and what it'll do for the firm. And it sounds like just kind of a nice buzzword, strong project management. What does that mean? So I would suggest taking some of the slides that we have there about the importance of a strong project management culture, and you don't even have to use the word strong project management culture, but just talk about the importance of having those kinds of things in place in the firm. I don't think you're going to get a lot of resistance because I think senior managers are pretty much on board once it's explained that way.
Okay. If you were developing a formal PM training program, where would you start?
Well, obviously I'm biased because we have a formal PM boot camp, so probably a less biased answer to that will come from Bob. So Bob, I'll let you answer that one.
Well, I do think you look at resources. PSMJ is certainly one of them that has a proven track record, that can provide some type of guidance. Someone who's been there and done that, who can take you through the various elements of it. I would say you're going to be much better off with someone with a background that literally is project management. So, like I said, my background is in accounting, and although I understand the business, I think that the credibility of someone who's been a project manager for a good period of time is going to have the kind of credibility, and there are management consulting firms that provide that capability.
I will jump in actually and give you some unbiased advice on how to establish a strong project management training program, and this doesn't have anything to do with selling our program. A lot of times we're asked by especially the larger firms to come in and help them do that, and what we do, and you can do this too at your firm, is the first thing that most people start with is, well, what's the curriculum? What do we want to teach them? And that's the wrong place to start. The place that you want to start into building an in-house project management training program is ask yourself this question: what results do we want to get from this program? What business results do we want to achieve? And for example, we want fewer overruns on projects. We want happier clients. That's what you need to start with. And then once you have the list of results, then the next question you want to ask yourself is, okay, how are we going to measure those results? Because at the end of the day, a PM training program is an investment. And if you can't demonstrate the return on that investment, it is not going to be sustainable. And so you have to in order to demonstrate return, you've got to be able to measure the results. So what are the results you want? How are we going to measure them? And now, once you answered that question, now you're ready to talk about the curriculum.
Great advice, Dave.
Okay, last question. It's often the case that it's the team on, you remember, Dave, your picture of the Inquisition?
Yep.
It's often the case that it's the team on the rack and the PM turning the wheel. Do you have any tips for making PMs part of the team rather than the big stick wielder?
Well, if the PM is turning the wheel and it's the project team on the rack, the question I would ask is, look at who the top performers on the team are. The bad performers on the team, they just want to keep their job. They'll put up with it. But the top performers, they won't put up with it. And they simply will refuse to work. They'll simply be too busy to work for project managers who take that approach. So project managers that put their team on the rack, they're going to get the poor performers because they have no choice, but they're not going to get the good performers on their team. And so if a project manager wants to be successful in getting the good performers on the team, better use a little bit more sophisticated approach.
And if they're being held accountable and measured, that's not going to fly.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, it's 2:18, so thank you everyone very much for joining us today. Thanks to Bob. Thanks to Dave. So just as a reminder, tomorrow we'll send a recording of today's session along with the slides. There are questions we didn't get to today. We're looking at Dave and Bob's email addresses. Feel free to reach out to either of them. So with that said, thank you very much. We appreciate your time and hope you got value out of today's conversation.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks for attending.